of protected crossing. I think MCDOT is likely to tackle that topic, but want to make sure that we're providing regular opportunities for protected crossings throughout the plan area. So this is showing that the green dots are where we currently have protected crossings. So in our case, these are places that are either always stop controlled on smaller streets and then full color signals at some of the more major streets. And I just wanted to emphasize here the long distances, which is probably no surprise to folks familiar with the area, that there are really long distances to travel between those protected crossings. The dashed lines on the chart show, in a town center context, that is likely what our vision is for this area. Recommended that there are crossings every 400 feet for a town center street or 600 feet for a town center boulevard, and only a few locations in the plan area meet those guidelines, and in the other areas it's substantially longer. So they're on Medical Center Drive up to 3,000 feet between protected crossings. Similarly, on Key West or Darnestown, you're over 2,000 feet between protected crossings. And so, pedestrians aren't likely to travel that far out of their way to make the crossing, and so are much more likely to cross at an unprotected location that still could very well be a legal crossing, but much more likely that drivers won't yield to them. And then even if there's a need for a long distance of out of direction travel, folks might be more likely to just cross the street mid-block.
So I know that on Great Seneca, at least between, where you have the 2,550 feet, it looks like there are two new stoplights going in there that are reflected on this map.
Yes.
But I guess the question, well, no further question besides that. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for noting that, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to make recommendations for more of those throughout the area, so that it's easier for people to walk. So the next slide kind of shows, again, just another perspective of looking at this multiple destinations in the area. And this is a little bit of a GIS exercise to get here, but the Pathway Comfort Access Score is essentially a measure of how easy it is for all of the points in the surrounding area, so other residences or other businesses or other points of interest, to walk to the given destination. And so you can see, again, to my earlier point, that the Pathway Comfort Access Score actually is not too bad in the area, that generally they're relatively comfortable paths among destinations, but the crossings are really where we're having the biggest challenge in providing comfortable connectivity for pedestrians. So the next slide, get into crash data, and we actually do have some updated crash data here that we could share a link to, but this is based on data from 2015 to 2020. There were 23 severe injuries and 1 fatality within the focus area. So quite a few crashes, and many of them you can kind of see the pattern occur on some of the larger, higher speed roadways. And then on the next slide, showing from a bicycle perspective, level of traffic stress, which is a similar concept, again, based on the facilities that are available to cyclists, how comfortable it would be for a cyclist to ride on those facilities. And so you can see where there's some side paths, there are very low or low stress connections, but through much of the area, you can kind of make out both the general lack of street connectivity, very large blocks, and so very long distances in between, and then things like the speed of the traffic, the lack of separation of the cyclists from vehicular traffic contribute to the high and moderate stress that are the red lines. And then on the right are the existing bikeways. So you can see that there's pretty good connectivity along the more major roadways, but really lacking that sort of internal street grid structure and facilities for cyclists on those streets. And then the next slide is a step in the direction of trying to address that. The LSC Loop Trail is a recommendation, and Steve Finley probably could do a better job of describing this because he was very intimately involved in developing the design guidelines for this, but really represents a high quality trail facility with design features that kind of circulates through the center of the LSC. Yeah, Nita, is there a question? Oh, maybe not. I mean, did you have your hand up, or are you? Good. Okay. And we'll get into the big ideas in a moment. We'll show kind of how the LSC relates to the other bike facilities that are part of the big ideas. So the
Hey, for some
next, oh,
reason
sorry.
we're having trouble hearing you, but I wonder if you might want to drop your question in the chat. Oh, I see microphone
Oh
isn't
yeah.
working. Never mind. So if you want to drop your question in the chat, we'd be happy to address it that way.
Okay. Yeah, and when that comes in, we'll read it out. So for existing transit, 8 routes from right on through the area. Metro Rail and Mark are relatively nearby, but there are still some challenges sort of on the, it's not even last mile, it's sort of last 4 miles to get between either Shady Grove or Rockville and the Life Sciences Center, and the 3 Mark stations that are nearby. The private NCI shuttle does help to bring those staff members into the Life Sciences Center. And we've heard from some folks that we've talked to that even if they are not NCI employees, some folks rely on the shuttle, and just hope that that they can find a seat on the shuttle to get to the LSC. So I think connecting to those is something we're thinking about. And then this is just to characterize some of the commute patterns to the Life Sciences Center. This is based on the regional travel demand model, but just gives a sense for the commute shed. So the red outline of the activity center roughly aligns with the Life Sciences Center, and more than 20,000 people commute daily to the area. And 16% of those trips are by transit. And the blue outline shows the uh, commute shed of 45 minutes to reach the LSC by auto. And the orange dots show the origins of the trips that are traveling to the area. So you see there's a pretty tight concentration right in the central part of the county, going in a little bit into the district, and then in Frederick County and Frederick as well, but really distributed throughout the region. And by contrast, when you move to the transit trips, you can see the average transit commute. Sorry, I didn't mention that it was 44 minutes, I think, for the auto commute, but the average transit commute is over an hour. And so you can see that that commute shed really shrinks because there's not as uh, easy a route to reach the LSC by transit as there is by auto. And the destinations are relatively closer to the LSC, but there's still some pretty long distance transit trips that folks are taking to reach the area.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. You actually just touched on the question or comment that I had. A few slides ago, you showed how the distance between crossings, and I noticed that Darnestown Road and Great Seneca, and I believe Brochart, had large gaps in where there are crosswalks. And the comment I was going to make is someone who grew up in the area that rode the bus a lot, like the Route 56, which goes straight through here. There are bus stops on either the north or south side of all those roads that are nowhere near bus stops. I mean, nowhere near crosswalks. Like where where it says there's 2,200 feet gap in cross on the left side of the screen right over there, at the Bellward site. There's at least 2 Route 56 bus stops immediately adjacent to Bellward, but there's no crosswalk at all. So you're running across 4 or 5 lanes just to get into the townhouses across the street. And I know y'all don't control state highway roads and all that, but I think it's important to emphasize that. I know that MCDOT is trying to bring all these new routes, but people are just going to be running across the road, and if they're not able to do that, they're going to be walking, and cars might not stop in time.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. That's a really good point. And yeah, I think that where there are transit stops, that's an especially important place to have a protected crossing, because folks who are taking transit generally take it in both directions. And so it might be convenient on one side when they're boarding, but when they get off at the other end of the trip, yeah, you made the point. So in the interest of addressing some of that challenge in reaching the LSC by transit, this is the Great Seneca Transit Network that MCDOT is currently advancing. The pink and lime routes of this are moving forward at the moment, and the cobalt, gray, and lime extended are kind of longer term plans for enhanced transit. in the area, but this is an enhanced transit service for the lime and pink lines, really to provide circulation through the area and especially connectivity to the Shady Grove Metro. And the next slide shows in a little more detail the stops in the Life Sciences Center. So along Medical Center Drive and Brochard, and then ultimately ending at the Treville Transit Center that's just across from the universities at Shady Grove, and then ultimately connecting north to the Shady Grove Metro. And in this initial phase, the idea is to have dedicated bus lanes along Fields, DeCoverly, and Brochard and Medical Center Drive. That would be repurposing the curb lanes as dedicated bus bike only lanes.
Does this replace, or how does it, or is the plan to modify existing bus routes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know how MCDOT is adjusting their service relative to the GSTN. I don't know if, Gary, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I see you're on the call. Or if there's anyone from MCDOT who
Yeah,
could
no,
address that.
I have not been involved in that detail of planning, so I can't contribute to the discussion right now. Thank you. But we
Okay.
can, we can get back. That's a good question.
Yeah, thank you. That is a good question.
You're muted, Alex.
I'm sorry, I was just about to say maybe this is a good time to pause and see if there are any other questions about the background. I think we're now sort of starting to shift into the big ideas. Okay, and feel free to chime in if there are along the way.
Actually,
So
just one quick question. You've used the term
Sure.
protected crossing. Does that mean there's a stop sign or stoplight with the crosswalk?
yeah, that's right. Either an all-way stop control or a full color signal, or the hawk signals that flash red and then turn red after a pedestrian presses the button. Those count as protected crossings too, but there weren't any on that map.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so kind of teeing up. Oh, sorry, Jessica.
Oh, I was just going to mention that, one of the things that we tried to do with the master plan is to put sort of policy guidance in the recommendations, but leave flexibility for implementation to the implementing agencies. We are not an implementing agency, and so we want to make sure that our partners at MCDOT or SHA have the flexibility that they need to use the right sort of mechanism or tool that they deem appropriate as we're advancing implementation. So that's why we kind of have this more general term of protected crossing rather than specifying traffic signal, hawk signal, those sorts of things.
So, Jessica, just to clarify, what we've been reviewing right now is not the big ideas so far. It's really the context which the big ideas fit into for the transit recommendations. Is that right?
Well, it's for all the transportation.
Sure.
I mean, ultimately will be for all the transportation recommendations. And so this is kind of like the context for moving into the discussion about the big ideas. One thing that kind of resonated with me last week was it seemed like having some of that additional context as part of the discussion was helpful. Hopefully I didn't assume that.
It's totally, no, it's great and extraordinarily helpful. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that what we've been reviewing right now is context, and supporting information as opposed to the big ideas, which we're going to talk about that are how you're thinking about, modifying and or enhancing the plans going forward, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And one thing we talked about last week was sort of what goes into the development of these ideas or ultimately the recommendations. And it's sort of a three-legged stool. There is the sort of, existing conditions analysis that our team does, and Alex walked you through part of his existing conditions analysis. We do have a much longer presentation that we shared with the planning board on April 20th, or no, January. In January, we shared the existing conditions with the planning board, and that was included in the link we shared in advance of last week. So we're trying to kind of share with you some of that planner expertise that's going into the big ideas. Another sort of leg of the stool is outreach and engagement, and then a third leg of the stool is technical consultant support that we might need. And as Alex will talk about in greater detail, we do also have a consultant that's helping us with the transportation analysis of the big ideas.
So I don't know if this counts as a fourth leg or if it's just because I think it's more relevant or impactful in this section on transportation than the others. The area we're talking about is a weirdly shaped island in the middle of a bunch of communities, the city of Gaithersburg, the city of Rockville, whatever, who all, you can do whatever you want on a traffic, as part of this science center. But if half a block away, the city of Gaithersburg is not playing nice, right, or doesn't share the same vision, the improvements you make might be irrelevant because they do, and I don't know enough about traffic to say what it specifically could be, but they do something that just invalidates the recommendations or the work that you do. So I guess as we go through this, I'd like to understand as well how you're working with them, right? These border communities.
Well, luckily, we have representatives from both Gaithersburg and Rockville on the call tonight. So this is one of the mechanisms or avenues that we use to communicate and coordinate. We also typically engage both Gaithersburg and Rockville and Washington Grove at sort of key milestones in the planning process to get their thoughts and feedback and sort of check the temperature. And I anticipate that will continue to do so moving forward. We also have a monthly coordination meeting, a quarterly coordination meeting among the Gaithersburg, Rockville, Montgomery planning, and we've recently started to invite Washington Grove to that coordination meeting as well. So it is something that we are mindful of, particularly in this area that is really kind of pieces among Gaithersburg and Rockville. And I don't know if Manisha or Laura, not to put you guys on the spot, but if you want to add anything.
No, I think you covered it, Jessica. I'm not really involved in transportation with my role, so I would, you would probably work more with my supervisor in Department of Public Works when it comes down to transportation things. But we're certainly always open to working together, and Jessica and Maren are always very good about reaching out to us when big things do come up.
From the city of Rockville, we just adopted our comprehensive master plan in August of 2021, and our comprehensive master plan won an award at the American Planning Association for an outstanding plan in pedestrian safety and vision zero are one of our overarching elements. And we are here to work with the county and ensure that whatever the county is doing, we are here to support them. And also, we have pretty stringent pedestrian traffic development standards as well. So we're not here to kind of, we're here to work with them and not against them. I hope that helps.
Thanks. Why don't we
Yeah.
let Alex continue on unless anybody has any burning questions right now.
All right, thank
Great.
you. Yeah, so just a little bit more background kind of at a higher level before we get into the big ideas. So these are some county-wide policy guidance documents that have been adopted since the 2010 plan. So the first one is Vision Zero, which folks might be familiar with. This was adopted in 2017, and it prioritizes human life over mobility. And the key piece of Vision Zero is that it strives to eliminate all transportation fatalities and serious injuries. So the idea is that fatalities and serious injuries from traffic crashes are preventable, and that's the priority. Another document that's guiding our recommendations is the Climate Action Plan, and that includes a variety of actions to expand public transit and active transportation and micromobility. And it really recommends limiting any expansion of the roadway network and major new road construction. So really kind of shifting focus toward a more complete streets and multimodal approach to transportation. And then that kind of tees up the Complete Streets design guides that MCDOT and the planning department collaborated on. These provide guidance on the different types of streets. And I kind of alluded earlier to the crossing distances. That's just one example of guidance that's in this document. And if you're curious about it, I'd encourage you to check it out. It's pretty graphically rich and kind of gives you a nice idea of what the streets could look like. That said, there's not a prescription for every single street, so there are kind of some ranges of parameters in there, but this addresses things like the number of lanes, the target speeds, what the bicycle and pedestrian facilities on different types of streets might look like, and we'll be keeping those in mind as we make our recommendations for the individual roadways. And then finally, Thrive really kind of helps to shift the planning paradigm and the way that we think about transportation to really focus on a lower priority for the construction of new roadways and really focusing on providing reliable transit, thinking about expanding the street grid, and creating a safe and comfortable network for walking and biking. So again, kind of emphasizing the use of all modes. And then just the last piece of context, Corridor Forward, and Jessica, I might lean on you since you also were primarily involved in this plan, but this kind of re-envisions the Corridor Cities Transit Way as a network of dedicated bus lanes, and we'll show in just a moment sort of how those align with work that's already underway, and it's intended to support the current and planned transit service. I think just a note on this, kind of as Jessica was describing the way that we work with implementing agencies, the planning department doesn't make specific recommendations about the service or arrange for the provision of the service. That's right on an MCDOT, but we can make recommendations and coordinate with the agencies that do provide that transit service, including MDOT for commuter buses. So you can see in blue on this map are the corridor connectors, and then also overlaid there in green is the currently planned BRT network. And so providing a lot of service into the Life Sciences Center. Again, this is sort of background information, so not everything that we're recommending, but as part of the plan, we're keeping this in mind, and we are making recommendations for dedicated bus lanes on the areas that are shown in blue. And so on the next slide, just showing how that aligns with the Great Seneca Transit Network. So for the near term, and actually this has shifted just a little bit because one of those GSTN routes has been subsequently updated, but this should give a general idea of how this aligns. So you can see the lime and pink routes coming from Shady Grove, which are just shown in black on this map, but how that overlays. And then looking to the future, the cobalt line that goes off to the east on Maryland 28, also aligning with that. And as we make our actual recommendations within the plan area, we'll be further realigning these so that they match up with the service that MCDOT is providing. And then the next slide shows the alignment with the Corridor Cities Transit Way dedications. And again, generally following previous recommendations in the LSC and to the west, with some slight modifications to the east to provide access to the Shady Grove Metro. And Jessica, I don't know if there's anything that that you want to clarify or expand on.
Not specifically. I think that, we've talked with the group about Corridor Forward quite a few times last year, but I do know that we have some folks that joined us after that, after those presentations. I think we just wanted to make sure that the group was aware of Corridor Forward's recommendations, particularly related to the CCT, because these corridor connectors that we're showing in the blue on this map are sort of a reimagination of the CCT. There were some through the planning process, identified some challenges with the CCT and tried to identify slight tweaks that would allow right of way to be available for dedicated transit without some of those challenges, including additional overpasses of I-270. So the routing of the connectors was changed to take advantage of locations that have existing overpasses. I think that we also just wanted to communicate that this is really attempting to align with the Great Seneca Transit Network. And as Alex mentioned, we'll be paying close attention to that through the Great Seneca Plan to make sure that we have alignment. And also just wanted to point out that, the corridor connectors are still intended to serve the communities and the activity centers that were previously envisioned for service by the Corridor Cities Transitway.
Can I ask you a question? Hey, Jessica. So thanks. That was a lot right there. I'm kind of unpacking it all piece by piece. So would this be the formal moment of essentially declaring that the CCT is no longer in the planning and this is now the preferred sort of major transit network of the plan? Would that be like an affirmative outcome of this?
Yes. It's not part of this though. That has already occurred, and that occurred with the council's approval of Corridor Forward, the I-270 plan, which was last April 2022.
Okay. I mean, I know that approved the bus transitway. I didn't realize that affirmatively kind of put the nail in the CCT.
Well, okay. I guess what this plan did was again reimagine the CCT into this network of dedicated bus lanes that could be used by the Great Seneca Transit Network, for example, or other transit service, again, sort of leaving that to our partners in the implementing agency, and really just providing the space to make sure that we have dedicated space available for high quality, reliable transit, but continuing to provide connections to each of those communities that had previously been served by the CCT. There was one other thing I wanted to mention, and it slipped my mind. So hopefully it'll come back to me and I can build on that a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we can move into the big ideas then. So starting out, the first big idea we've kind of already alluded to is this idea of introducing a street grid. So you can see in this figure the existing roads, and in the dashed yellow lines the proposed roads. And actually, there's a figure a little bit later that I'll speak to that makes this even more clear. But really trying to create a more recognizable street grid so that there's not so much circuitous out of direction travel. And a more fine-grained street grid so that it's easier for drivers to reach their destinations, as well as folks who are walking, biking, and taking transit to improve that connectivity. And then on the next slide, kind of related to that.
Can I interrupt for a second, Alex?
Sure.
Alex, this is Larry. I just want to, if you go back to the slide, I think Jessica's aware also, and I apologize for not being available last week. I was called out of town on a business meeting. When you're going through the hospital site, I just want to make sure we spend some time with you all. We don't have to do it tonight in regard to how they're moving forward with the way that healthcare is being delivered. I think a lot of you know we just broke ground on a new $200 million bed tower. The connectivity between buildings, what's happening with Blackwell is very important to them. They're interested in all the vision that you all have and the connectivity. There's some potential siting challenges as you go through the campus, again, because of healthcare delivery. So I just want to, offline, we can continue to talk about that. I hope, and again, I apologize, I was away. Jessica had asked and that we have some of our planning and our master planning shared with you all. They fully intend to do that if they haven't sent that already. And we can spend some time, you know, again, with the leadership there, continuing to work, because they're very committed to your vision. I've shared it with them, I've looked at it, and they're excited about all the connectivity and the things that you all are talking about. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. And we did receive the information from Adventus. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, Alex. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Thanks for flagging that. Yeah, so related to this idea of improved connectivity is also right-sizing the travel lanes, particularly the number of vehicle travel lanes in some of the wider roadway cross sections, to make things safer and more comfortable for people walking, rolling, bicycling. Also, as Avneet was mentioning, folks riding transit ultimately become pedestrians at either end of their trip. And for folks driving too, the wider the intersections become, the longer the signal cycle lengths tend to be, and folks end up waiting at those signals as well. And from a safety perspective, this is also critical for all modes. As we saw the crashes before, a lot of those crashes were resulted in serious injuries and fatalities in this area actually weren't necessarily vulnerable road users, but folks who were driving or passengers in cars. And then on the next slide, this is the figure that I was alluding to earlier, kind of expanding on this idea of building out the street grid. So the left shows the existing conditions with the number of lanes and the existing roadways, and the right side shows the proposed roadways and numbers of lanes. And what I hope stands out is that there are a lot more lines on the map on the right, but that the colors shift toward relatively fewer lanes on each of those lines. So we're kind of looking to distribute the traffic that is local to the area so that it can more easily reach its destination while still providing for regional connectivity. And one other thing I'd note on this, the existing lanes, it gets cut off just to the west, but as Darnestown comes into the area, it's 4 lanes before it reaches Muddy Branch and then widens out to 6 in the area. Some of these, Darnestown especially, I think it's a good example where it goes from 3 lanes to 4 lanes to 5 lanes, depending on where you are along the stretch. I think we're just looking to smooth some of that out and have a more consistent cross section and have that cross section be easier for all modal users to traverse.
So I guess so this implies that with this would come a significant number of protected crossings. Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. We haven't quite gotten to that detailed level of recommendation, but yes, in general, that's something we're aiming to do more of.
Yeah. And I'm curious, and this is purely selfish on my part because I live right off Muddy Branch. So your plan takes Muddy Branch down from 4 lanes to 2 lanes at the same time. There's going to be a lot of development at the Bellward site.
That's right. Yeah. And kind of providing additional connectivity to Key West and to Darnestown and to Muddy Branch. But yes, it is reducing those lanes and with the intention of repurposing them as dedicated bus lanes.
Alex, this might be a good time to talk about the analysis piece that goes along with these big ideas.
Yeah, thank you. So, and yeah, I think Jessica alluded to that earlier as well. So we have our consultant currently churning away on these, and just kind of reemphasizing that these are big ideas at this point and not necessarily our preliminary recommendations, or I should say they are not yet our preliminary recommendations. And so we're evaluating this roadway network, the transit recommendations, all of these land use changes as well for, we're doing multiple scenarios. So an existing scenario, a sort of near term scenario that has some of the Great Seneca transit network changes, and then the longer term vision of the land use build out and all of these other roadway changes. And so we'll be able to see from that analysis, when I showed the existing conditions figure earlier of the vehicles per hour per lane, we'll have comparable information for these big ideas. And so we can kind of assess what the effects of those would be on vehicular travel, as well as some of the other metrics. I don't want to go too wonky into those details now because we don't have any data to show you at this point, but we'll be thinking about things like accessibility, those commute sheds that I showed before, thinking about accessibility to the area by auto and transit, thinking about the pedestrian comfort, thinking about vehicle miles traveled, and mode share. Yeah, Sandy, do you have a question? Oh, it looks like Gary.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Just a point of clarification. When you were showing from existing lanes to proposed lanes, so these are vehicular travel lanes excluding the dedicated bus lanes, correct? Just to
Yes.
clarify that. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. These are general purpose travel lanes, and the dedicated bus lanes would be in addition to these.
So I just wanted to provide a little context. You know, you were correct on the 2010 plan. We spent, I don't know, a year, it seemed like, working on the interchanges and all the modeling and the analysis and the non-auto driver mode share and all of those things, and came up with the plan that we did in 2010 for, I don't know, a couple million 2 or 3 million square feet of development with a staging plan that had transportation infrastructure coming into play when development was supposed to occur. Well, development didn't occur as originally planned, and other improvements have been made to lift the first, remove the first trigger and lift the amount of development that can occur. And that's perfectly fine. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is 100, and maybe it's appropriate, 180 degrees different. Instead of 6 interchanges, you know, and have interchanges. You know, Muddy Branch was to be widened to 2 lanes, to be 8 lanes, not 6 lanes. Key West was 8 lanes. Now it's down to whatever. I mean, so, and we have the development that was thought about in 2010 and some previously approved prior to 2010 coming on board. You look at all the development along Darnestown at the old Human Genome site, and you look at stuff going on at Medical Center Drive, and obviously on the PSTA, you wonder how we could add all of this growth, which is great, and not add any of the capacity that was envisioned in 2010. Now I know you're going to do analysis and rethink a lot of those things, and I think that's great. It's just that this is a total 180-degree reversal, and it may be appropriate, but it's just a shock because I live in the area and I know what the traffic is. I know how difficult it is to walk and bike. That's part of the problems, maybe why there's so much traffic. And so it's just I'm trying to see. I can't wait to see what the analysis shows, and I hope that we can wait long enough to see it before we have to actually have the big ideas actually take shape. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Maybe I can start and with some thoughts and turn things back to Alex. You know, I think that a lot has changed from a policy perspective since 2010. You know, as Alex mentioned, we do have the Vision Zero policy. We also have Drive Montgomery, that our policy guidance from the council is to stop planning for cars and start planning for people. And so that's really, you know, at the heart of the work that we're thinking about as we're kind of putting these ideas out there for analysis and for discussion. I think that the other thing that I'd mention briefly is as we were going through the minor amendment in 2021, we looked at the sort of traffic that was anticipated in 2010 with development that had happened, or excuse me, we evaluated the traffic that was anticipated as part of the 2010 plan, and then kind of, you know, existing conditions in 20, you know, I want to say maybe 2019, because we were conscious of the pandemic and didn't want that to have a sort of, you know, factor in the analysis that we were doing. And we discovered that despite development that has happened since the approval of the plan, the traffic had stayed pretty constant. And that was really kind of informative and telling for us. And I think that, you know, we are trying to really think about how we can make this area one that you have a choice for how you move about. And for those of you that were there last week, I think this will probably sound pretty familiar. You know, right now the sort of most convenient way to access this area is by car, and I think that, you know, the MCDOT Great Seneca Transit Network provides a really great introduction of transit into the area that will be reliable. And we're trying to think about not only transit, but also breaking down the blocks and providing infrastructure that will allow people to feel comfortable walking, biking, or taking transit, and, you know, certainly continuing to have cars in the area. Like, cars are not going away, but we really want to try to be mindful about how we have choice in how you move about the community in the area.
So yeah, I want to just speaking to Gary's points for a second. I mean, it seems pretty, you know, I think what Gary is alluding to, what Gary is calling out, you know, it does seem pretty clear that the new proposals are moving towards a more, you know, a quasi-urban street grid with localized traffic patterns and away from a street pattern oriented towards rapid transit through the region, right? I mean, if you look at the existing roads on the left and the new roads on the right, the existing roads on the left are great for moving quickly through our area, you know, the plan area, and for quickly getting people into the outskirts of the plan area, certainly, but they're pretty terrible for moving people within the plan area. And I think that's what, you know, is that a reasonable way of you know, of looking at it? Alex and Jessica, do you think?
I think that's right, and maybe with a slight tweak of, I think that's what they're intended to do, is move people quickly through the plan area, but I don't want to have any illusions about what the future looks like if we don't make any changes. I mean, I think we've seen pretty consistently that you can continue to add travel lanes, you know, if we went the other direction from this, and not necessarily address the congestion that's passing through the area. So, but I do think it's a fair characterization of sort of a trade-off and a change in priorities toward providing options, really focusing on safety, as I mentioned the Vision Zero before, and prioritizing that somewhat over mobility in the area. So when we see the results,
prioritizing throughput in the area as opposed to access over throughput, right? I mean, interior access, I would almost say, right?
Right. Yeah. Prioritizing access and multimodal options. And we'll have to see what, you know, when the results come back. And I also don't want to say that we'll analyze this and it'll come back and everything's going to, you know, travel times for autos are going to decrease, or that, you know, things are going to get dramatically easier necessarily. I think we'll have to see what the modeling shows, and then maybe make some difficult decisions about where our priorities are.
Well, I mean, again, I've been on this committee since day one and participating in the plans discussions for a long time. So, you know, there was always a healthy, and I'm understating, skepticism about how effective the planned changes would be in actually promoting throughput without dramatically, you know, reducing quality of life in the surrounding areas of the plan from the original plan. I mean, 6 interchanges. And Gary, you know this as well. We've had many of these discussions. 6 interchanges adjacent to residential areas, high speed, you know, extraordinarily wide roads without clear plans for you know, taking those roads and making them pedestrian accessible or multimodal accessible. Those plans were pretty sketchy in terms of how they would translate into an actual lifestyle friendly you know, regional plan. This plan looks like it is, you know, the new plan looks much more lifestyle friendly, but unfortunately it probably doesn't, you know, it doesn't fully address the issue of people passing through our region from north to south, which is going to happen and stuff like that. It doesn't, it seems like, you know, we're going to make, you know, we're going to make access easier. We're going to defray traffic across the grid, but people going through the area are gonna go slower. And, you know, and they're gonna probably have to live with that. If I, you know, looking at it at a, you know, 100,000 foot level, if I, you know, from here looking into the future, I don't know. That's what it looks like to me, at least. Now, you know, and I guess the counterpoint to that is, you know, again, they go pretty damn slow through our area today, through much of the area today, and you know, the alternative plan of 2010 had some really nasty trade-offs in order to avoid slowing down that traffic that, you know, nobody was especially happy with. So this, to me, my take is this is better. But I would say, as feedback from the committee, this is probably something that the committee might want to spend some time discussing further, how we feel about the shift in priorities for the proposed traffic alignments, you know, and road alignments and so on. Okay, I'll stop talking.
But I do think it's a good point, right? When I look at 28, for example, and I think about the large number of people who come down 28 to go through this area to get to 270, right? Whether they're going up Muddy Branch and across, whether they're going out, you know, Key West, whether they're going out, you know, Darnestown to join down at, you know, where 28 gets on. And there's a significant number of people who come down that route who are still going to come down that route. They don't have a better alternate. So, you know, when I look at these roads all going down from 6 lanes to 4, or from 4 to 2, I'm concerned that that volume will quickly overwhelm, and they don't have a different way to go. They're not going to go on the grids, right? They're going to stay on 28. So.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. And I think that is sort of the idea, that the through traffic, some of the through traffic might find alternative routes. I mean, 270 does parallel the corridors. If there are other, you know, taking Muddy Branch and up to Sam Ige and over to 270 that way, you know, as folks adjust their travel patterns as conditions change. But I think the idea is to have the regional through traffic continue to use some of those larger roads, Key West, Darnestown, Great Seneca, and then distribute more of the traffic that's destined for the plan area onto the local grid. Okay, so so moving into the next topic, and maybe kind of in support of some of these other changes, is the idea of providing some of those other options. And so these are the dedicated bus lanes that we're evaluating currently. So the red dots show the Great Seneca Transit Network stops that were shown at a higher level before. Sorry, there's a lot of colors going on, but the pink line is the pink GSTN route. The lime line is the GSTN lime. Those kind of go then south onto the Treville Transit Center again. But on the timeline of the plan, we're also, working with MCDOT and recommending continuation of the other GSTN routes and the corridor connectors that we showed as part of Corridor Forward. So all of those blue lines align with the Corridor Forward recommendations. And all together, the purple lines show where we're considering dedicated bus lanes. And so really aligning the transit on those dedicated bus lanes to provide circulation within the plan area, particularly along Brochard and Medical Center, but also providing east-west connectivity from the Medical Center over to Bellward and then on north. And then the next slide, again, shows the LSC loop. So thinking from a walk and bike perspective. And then this also adds in the other bikeways that we're considering for the area. We don't have specific recommendations for each of these bikeways yet, but these would be, high quality separated bikeways, so either side paths or dedicated bike lanes with some protection to kind of build out a full network throughout the Life Science Center. And then the next big idea was one that I believe folks talked about last night, and there was some interest in, was this idea of a linear park. And I apologize, I skipped over the one. So where the linear park is along Great Seneca stops where Medical Center comes in, and then just to the south of there, the traffic volumes are similar, and the idea would be to repurpose those lanes for dedicated transit lanes as well. So kind of repurposing the right of way for different purposes. To the south, it would be for transit, and to the north, it would be to build out a larger open space. And I don't know, Jessica, sorry, how much we went into detail about this last meeting, but this open space would align with some open space that's being provided as part of the PSTA site that Jessica's cursor is over now. And yeah, the idea would be to make that a more substantial open space and to make the Great Seneca in that area more of a street feel and align with some adjacent land uses as well. And the next slide, I think, shows some precedent images of what that could look like. And again, this is sort of still an early form idea, and so it might evolve over time. I mean, it might be something like an open streets sort of use of part of the right of way in the near term, and then gradually developing that into a more full-fledged open space. But this is just sort of the big idea to put out there. And then the last one from the transportation perspective is those interchanges that we talked about. So, and it says remove interchanges, but I just want to be clear that it means remove the interchanges that were recommended in the previous plans. So basically recommending not constructing new interchanges in the Life Sciences Center or throughout the rest of the plan area. And as we kind of discussed before, one of the big ones is Shady Grove and Key West, and putting an interchange in at that intersection, I think would have some pretty adverse effects on the adjacent land uses, on the quality of life and the ability for pedestrians and bicyclists to circulate throughout the area. And we're also recommending not including the other two proposed interchanges along Great Seneca. So I know we've gone quite a bit over time. Happy to keep discussing, answer other questions, or address those as they continue to come up. Yes.
So one thing that is, I guess, noticeably missing from the big ideas around transit is any concept of micro transit. And I think that's a pretty big gap for a 30-year forward-looking plan, where we're clearly going through, you're looking for to create a grid-oriented, high connectivity environment, but there are no clear nods, or discussion of how microtransit can play a role here. Not to get too futurist on it or anything, but between electric bicycles, all kinds of electric modes of microtransit, as well as electric fleets of electric vehicles, perhaps electric enclosed vehicles like cars and so on. There's a lot of I know all of the planning staff are well aware that there's a lot of thinking going on right now about how public transit evolves to include micro transit as an opportunity, but none of that in the big ideas here.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's certainly something we can consider. And I do think the recommendations for things like the LSC loop or the other bikeways would be consistent with the idea of, yeah, micromobility devices, e-bikes, e-scooters, those sorts of things. I think you're right. I don't think we've really thought too deeply about the idea of larger vehicle microtransit, if that's something like an on-demand shuttle or yeah, perhaps an electric, like a neighborhood electric vehicle sort of concept, those sorts of things. But thank you for that comment. I think that's something we're thinking about.
Andy, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi. Along the lines of what you were just speaking about, as you know, we do have a pilot program involving well, first of all, we have Capital Bike Share, and we do have some Capital Bike Share stations still in this area, and then also we have a pilot program underway that is for e-bikes and e-scooters on a shared basis. One of the challenges we have is ensuring that those vehicles have good storage or parking areas. And so even though it's not maybe a big idea, it might be a medium-sized idea to incorporate some of that type of facility as you're looking at this in a little more fine-grained way, so that it can be a challenge to have these things located in a way that doesn't impede other kinds of movements by pedestrians and wheelchairs and other cyclists and whatever. So just a thought as far as providing, and they have to be fairly frequent because people want to ride them to, close to their destinations. That's sort of the whole point of those kinds of micromobility devices.
Just to
Yeah,
add,
thank you.
This area is included in our pilot for e-scooters and e-bikes, and I look every day at where we're currently up to about 1,400 e-scooters and e-bikes in the portions in the county that it's permitted to operate, and that's an increase of several hundred over the last few weeks, and very few trips are in this area, which is perhaps testimony to how poor the infrastructure is for people to ride e-scooters and e-bikes. For instance, the current regulation says that you cannot ride an e-bike or an e-scooter on the sidewalk. Well, I don't know. A lot of these places, that's the only way I would ride it if I were riding. And so we're looking at how we can advance, perhaps maybe it could be one of your recommendations, how we can advance permitting sidewalk use, or certainly it can ride on trails and shared use paths, where we can ride and permit on sidewalks where the sidewalks are wide enough and where you have 4+ lanes of traffic going greater than 35 miles an hour. So we're trying to identify where in the county we can look at permitting sidewalk use for e-scooters and e-bikes. Obviously not in the downtown areas or the congested areas.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. And I think that's a useful thing to think about in the near term. And I think over the life of this plan, we're hoping that we can provide facilities that folks can comfortably ride the e-bikes and e-scooters on either dedicated side paths or dedicated bike lanes that or very low speed, relatively narrow town center streets that are comfortable. So that level of traffic stress map that we showed at the beginning, I think our goal is to have that change to be low or very low stress throughout the Life Science Center.
While I have my mic on, this is Sandy again. I just wanted to also mention parking as a huge underpinning to parking of vehicles as opposed to micromobility devices, parking of automobiles. That I would hope that the plan can address right now. One of our biggest challenges in achieving the goals for this area from a non-auto driver mode share goal perspective for people using non-auto modes. One of our biggest challenges is the unlimited free parking that exists all through this area and these huge surface parking lots. And, just how we address that, I don't know, maybe with some zoning revisions or some other things that don't enable, long-term unlimited free parking throughout the area, because we'll never get the type of development pattern, I think, that supports what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well,
yeah, thank you. And Jessica, I don't know, did we talk last week about the design recommendations about structured parking and reducing surface parking?
We did, and one of the things that we talked about is I think it's 26% of the plan area is surface parking lots today. So that's certainly something that we're thinking about as well.
Good.
Well, it looked like one way to address the parking was putting streets right through the middle of these existing parking lots. So that'll take care of some of the spots. I feel like the 2010 plan was kind of, and again, I'm not intimate with it, but it seemed like it was kind of one side of the spectrum. Or if we point that as the point of one side of the spectrum, and what you've shown us today seems to be, we'll call it the other side of the spectrum. And probably, like most things, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So it'd be interesting to see as you do your studies and run some numbers, is if you dial things up and down, right? If we don't reduce this number of lanes, but we keep it a 6-lane road on Key West, how does that impact the traffic? So as opposed to just saying, hey, let's run the numbers one way, let's look at different options, because although I think what you've shown here is where I was going to say we all, but most of us would like us to be, right, in this kind of environment where, I'm not taking my life into my hands when I'm trying to walk my dog across Money Branch Drive every morning. That there probably is some balance or maybe interim steps that we take to achieve this without making it so I can't get out of my neighborhood in the morning.
Yeah, thank you. And I think our current plan is to evaluate those various scenarios that I was describing. I think there is some flexibility if we see those results come back. I mean, as I mentioned before, I think we might have to make some difficult decisions. I think if the analysis shows that there's an unacceptable level of delay or congestion, that's something that we could consider and adjust the recommendations accordingly and reevaluate.
Great. So I've been making some notes. I'm assuming, Jessica, you have about potential topics or follow-up, but and I know Mark has also. So, anybody have anything else on transportation before we move on? Okay, thanks. If you guys can keep on going, that'd be great.
Thanks, Alex. And
thank you, everyone.
Now we'll introduce Ben to start the discussion on real estate economy and employment.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Jessica. So for those of you who don't know me, which is probably most people here, I'm a research planner. I'm in research and strategic projects here in planning. So we support, master plans and do our own special studies. Mostly with the data analysis part of it, and I typically focus on economy and employment, economic development, and also, I've been doing a lot of equity work lately. So yeah, that's where I'm doing. So I'm gonna go over, and I'm going to also go over the real estate part of this too. So basically, yeah, you can. Well, I guess at the moment, yeah, you can go. I mean, I think that one of the main points here, and this goes back to way at the beginning, there was mention of the pipeline, the beginning of this meeting tonight, there's mention of this pipeline that hasn't quite come to fruition. And I think what this will show is that this little section will show is that the Life Science Center really is a really major economic driver of Montgomery County. And in a time when, if you've been following it, the news, I mean, the national kind of the trends are okay. Things are picking back up since the pandemic, but Montgomery County really has been not rebounding as fast as as the region and a lot of our peer counties across the country. And this is not just a post-pandemic problem, but it's been a long-running problem that extends far beyond that. We've just been fairly stagnant, but not in this area. And so it's been growing. There's a lot of economic activity going on in a very, very productive and highly valuable industry. And what the real estate section will show is that really there is to bring it back to the pipeline, there's probably a good bit of unmet demand there. There's probably capacity that we could be taking advantage of that we aren't really at the moment. So just to jump into that, yeah, that's fine. I kind of as you guys know, probably life sciences is our main industry. We are somewhere, depending on how you rank it, in the top, one of the top regions for life science in the nation. And we've got about 11 million square feet of life sciences development, 2 million square feet of construction coming on board. Some of that's new construction, some of it's conversion. So now you can move ahead. So this is just looking at just total private employment, not life science specific, just overall employment. And this is comparing the plan area and in this case, the adjacent areas, because the plan boundaries are so funky. I just took the unincorporated Montgomery County part of the area that's kind of like in between the different chunks of this plan area, because it just, when you're analyzing, I guess, labor markets or local economies, it's just to break it up in that way is a little bit weird. But so for that reason, it's kind of the plan area and adjacent. This area has grown 28% from 2010 to 2021. The rest of the county has actually shrunk by 7% in total private employment over that time. So really just outpacing the rest of the county. So we can move ahead. A lot of that is because of the presence of the life science industry in this area. And there's R&D, research and development, which is a lot of it, but there's increasingly manufacturing. And this tends to be biomanufacturing, which is slightly different than, it's not making aspirin, it's making much more complex, different types of substances, basically, different types of therapies than that. So, but it's been growing in the plan area and adjacent. Again, it's grown. It's basically doubled. This is employment in those areas, while in the rest of the county, it has increased by about 10%. Not very much. So when it started out in 2010, where this life science center was basically kind of, split, employment in life sciences was split between this area and the rest of the county. Now the Great Seneca Corridor Life Science Center in particular has really just completely, outpaced the rest of the county. So it's clear that for whatever reasons, this is the area where people where new companies are coming and where companies are expanding within the county. So we can go ahead. So largest employers, and I apologize, I needed to update this slide. So we've got obviously the hospital medical center is one of the largest. There are a couple of very large federal employers that really don't have much to do with life sciences. FINRA is Financial Industry Regulatory Authorities there, and so is NIST, as I think most of you know. AstraZeneca should be on here. It has it lists, it's weird the way it lists it, but it's probably got about 4,000 to 5,000 people working for it at this time, and we've got a number of probably 250 to 500 employee other life science firms that are here. So that's really what makes, I mean, these are some fairly large employers for a small area. So we can go on. And yeah, good point. Somebody just noted National Cancer Institute not shown. Yeah, this is another, it's really tricky to sort out the employment because it's a technical thing that they don't come in our BLS data. We don't get National Cancer Institute. So we have to kind of go roundabout ways to find things, and I will, but that's a good point taken, and that's another thing I need to update on that slide is to find out exactly what they have and employ them. So thanks, and add that to the slide. So now looking at development market conditions, what we're going to do is basically look at, in office development, we will look at both space. Wait, let me see where we are here. Yeah, sorry. We'll be looking at space in the Life Science Center specifically, but we kind of have to do that in relation to the larger real estate submarkets in the area. So if you want to go on, next slide will kind of explain what that is. So when we're looking at the office market, which is also basically us looking at the life science market, because life science is generally office. Sometimes it's industrial, but in most cases here it's office. It's considered office. We'll be looking at the life science, a specific breakout of the life science center, but also in relation to these three combined submarkets: Rockville, North Rockville, and Gaithersburg, and then in some cases compared to the whole county. So it'll kind of in this nesting doll form, we'll have Life Science Center, the three submarkets, and then Montgomery County. And that's when we're looking, that's a good way to kind of get the context, the overall context for what's going on specifically in the Life Science Center. When we're looking at retail, which we do quickly at the end of this, we'll basically just be looking at the larger sub-market, because retail it doesn't differ so much. It's much more kind of consistent across submarkets. In the Life Science Center, it's not going to differ too much from what it will be in Gaithersburg. So just to get you kind of oriented to how we'll be looking at this. So we can move on and start talking about the office market. So when we look at the life science area compared to the Rockville, North Rockville, Gaithersburg submarket, it's got about 17% of the existing inventory and about 29% of the expected or the under construction inventory. So it should be, increasing, but given that a larger proportion of its what's under construction, it should be increasing its share of the it's building faster than the rest of the submarket is building. It has more Class A space than the rest of the submarket, the larger submarkets. So both these things really just kind of show that it's a place that's kind of desirable, in demand. A lot of this is due to its newer life sciences development, and those new buildings being built, and so probably to some extent what we're seeing with office, because there really isn't much office space being built at all these days, with post-pandemic and work from home, except for life science. It really is still going strong. I guess it's slowed down a little bit because interest rates are very high, but it is still getting built, and then for whatever else is happening, there is kind of this flight to quality that we're seeing. So it's going to be more the office space the regular office space that's still in demand is going to generally be Class A, recently built with a lot of amenities. So we can move on there. And so the trends are both the Life Science Center, the blue line, is the specific, small submarket among these other larger markets, is outpacing. I shouldn't say outpacing. It's stronger in both rent. Its rents are higher, and its vacancy is lower. So at this point, I would say a 6.5% office vacancy rate, which is where the Life Science Center is pretty good for this for office at this point. There are two new, so elsewhere in Maryland, in the general suburban Maryland area, you can see life science rents that range from $35 to $45 per square foot. The two new Alexandria real estate lab spaces in the life science area. There's one in the LSC and one in Germantown, and they're renting for about $45 per square foot. So these do tend to be the more expensive types of buildings, and that's what tends to be locating here. So we can move on. So deliveries and absorptions. There were no new deliveries from 2013 to 2019, but net positive absorption. So what that means is basically, people were moving in. Nothing was being built, but more people were moving in. That's how you get a lower vacancy rate. And then since there have been new deliveries since 2020, not a whole lot, but they have been, but absorption has been lower. Absorption has exceeded the new delivery. So absorption is basically just it's the net new people going into office space minus the people leaving office space or leaving their leases, I guess. And so when it's positive, you've just got more people kind of moving in than you do have leaving, and that's where that's where things start getting more expensive and the market gets a little tighter. And so yeah, there it is. We are increasingly seeing not much activity, as we all know, and is one of the points of this plan, and still increasing demand, at least definitely since the pandemic. So we can go on.
Hey, Ben?
Yeah.
When you talk about the delivery of new office space, I'm comparing the delivery of office space to what you said was under construction on earlier slides. Mm-hmm. Does under construction mean I can go see guys, with shovels in the ground, or does that mean
it probably would also mean that it's in the permitting stage. I can check on that. I'm to be honest, I'm kind of like the backup real estate person here. Our main real estate person couldn't be here. I'll check with him on how CoStar classifies that. But my impression is that you may not necessarily see active construction, and it still could be part of that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, conversions. I think the image got cut off here. The point of this is basically to say that there are office to lab conversions going on, and but really what it got cut off, the red is the non-conversion, the blue is conversion prices, and generally conversions are less valuable than just basically newly built actual dedicated life science space. So it may not be it's not same way. I shouldn't say the same way as, I'm sure you guys have heard the discussion around office to housing conversions, which can be really difficult and really expensive and generally, not worth it. Not I guess worth it for developers to pursue. I don't know that it's quite at that level, but it definitely isn't always going to be a no-brainer to convert reused office. Where there's a lot of the built environment footprint is very hard to change once it's made, and it just ends up in some cases like this one being more expensive than it's worth in a lot of ways. So that's just to say that these office conversions might be difficult. Also, what you can see here is that our price per square, and this is when you're talking about buying buildings, but our price per square foot is fairly low, which is an advantage in a lot of senses that should be a point we can use to attract more life science activity. But we also think, there's probably several reasons for this. One of this does have to do with venture capital, and that we, in a lot of ways, venture capital actually subsidizes life science rent. And when you're startup firms, early stage firms are not generating any revenue. They're basically living on their funding. And when they have more funding or venture capital, there's a lot of venture capital in San Francisco and Boston, more than there is here. And so they tend to have better infusions of cash, and aren't always, their funders aren't always, exactly going through their books and, seeing how much they're spending on real estate. So a lot of that is going to real estate. And we just don't have the same presence here. So that's just part of it. But there's probably other reasons also. So we can go to the next slide. We have here, we're in the same tier as like San Diego, roughly with our existing inventory. But as you can see, our pipeline is lagging, except for Philadelphia. We're behind all of the other major life science markets in our what we're expecting or what's under construction or proposed. So we really should, again, there's capacity that we're probably missing out on. So and again, that's a big focus of the plan. So we can go ahead.
How is this determined?
Oh, that is looking through. I would have to ask Bilal, who's our main person. Just I guess there's a source that he uses called Newmark. I don't know the exact like method for it.
So there's a research firm that tracks
these things. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's, like all these things, it's always imperfect, these kinds of things, but it's kind of like looking at, you look at these at kind of like the big picture, not for like to kind of every 1,000 square feet doesn't really matter. It's kind of just like the general size of the bars, which is the important thing here. So, yeah.
And this is thousands of square feet. So we're talking about 20 million square feet of pipeline in suburban Maryland, or is that $20?
No, that would be square feet. Yeah.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
do we have any reason to think that any of these other areas, especially the ones that are growing great guns like Boston and San Francisco, they don't have easier permitting processes, right? These are major cities, major developments. I
Yeah.
believe they have, similar hurdles, or is that incorrect?
Yeah, this is the $1 million question. And if you'd be in meetings with us, we ask this question a lot, and we are actually, we don't know the answer. You're probably right that a lot of these places are like San Francisco is not a like developer friendly place.
Right.
So we are conducting a life science study that is the idea is to answer some of these questions. Now it won't go into detail of like literally, going around and surveying all of the development processes for each of these places and comparing them. But what it will do is get some case studies and basically just kind of look at other regions and see how they were able to create this kind of life science area or district that we're looking to create, and see if there is anything that we can, it might be the regulations themselves, it might be the process, and it will be any and all of that we'll be looking at and looking at these case studies. So, but it's a great question, and it's one that we are constantly trying to find out. And I think that a lot of this, a lot of Boston and San Diego really has to do with things that I think may be beyond our control. Just from a land use perspective, their education, I mean, their higher education
Right, I was thinking
institutions
about
are
that, all
just,
the universities, yeah.
it's just better. And then there's kind of there's the cumulative advantage of kind of being first and being the most innovative, and they've just continued to build on that. And because it's true that if you, the life science, all of the places there are paying a lot more money in rent than any of the places here. So you would think it would be an automatic decision to move here, but that's just not always the case. Sometimes the talent that they have access to is worth it. And then once things get stuck, they get stuck. That's another thing. So so yeah, I think there's a couple more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Andrew Bossy,
yeah.
County DOT. I think just a couple more things that might kind of be caveats for this information is what's the population that you're looking at across each area? What's the land area that you're looking at across each area? Like we might be just focused on this one neighborhood of Montgomery County versus Boston maybe could include the city, it might include the suburbs, it might include multiple other areas. I'm not sure if you have the answers to that, but it just could be could also be shifting the data a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have the exact answer. I know that these are regional, so I know that they're the city that's named, and then and definitely include a good portion of the suburbs. I don't know the exact delineation, whether it's like the metro area. I mean, suburban Maryland is typically Montgomery and Frederick, probably some Howard. I don't think that and possibly Anne Arundel. I don't think that Baltimore is included in that, but again, I could confirm all these. So yeah, you're absolutely right though that it's not it's not a per it's not normalized by any sort of any of those other types of variables.
Hey, this is Mitch. So I was going to say the same thing. You need a denominator, right, to really make sense of all of this. And then also, Boston, I mean, they started 40 years ago, right? And it's not just the research universities, but I don't remember off the top of my head, but some of the economic development incentives that they offered sort of early in their crusade to do this were astronomical of sort of what they offered as, incentives for companies to locate there and tax breaks and other things to sort of start their what's now become sort of perpetual motion machine of being a life science hub. So, I mean, we could spend hours, right, talking about case studies of these other cities. It's really a lot happening.
Yeah, and I do want to say when we do get the case studies, we are kind of beyond. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's been books written about how this process has happened, and our case studies are going to be much more specific to how did you literally do this building, and how did you integrate housing into this? How did you get this kind of a nice kind of walkable area where you're incorporating life sciences in it. So it's going to be kind of I think more nuts and bolts than the general, because a lot of these things, you're right, we don't it's some of them are even a state issue, which and we've obviously heard complaints, I guess, about the state not really emphasizing this as much as they could, as much as other places. So yeah, it's a big issue. So yeah, next question. I'll just whoever, I think there's one person with a question, so.
Well, Ben, this is Phil. I'm going to interrupt for a second since we are approaching the end of our scheduled time. So I want, first of all, obviously we haven't completed your portion of the big ideas yet. How many more slides do you have to go, just out of curiosity? I mean, we haven't even talked about your big ideas yet, right?
Yeah,
We've talked about context.
We could. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. There's only one more slide. There's retail conditions. We really don't need to go through that. There's 2 slides of big ideas. Do you want me to just run through them really quickly?
So let's just, is the committee okay with continuing on this portion of the presentation for a few more minutes? And I guess the bigger question for the committee is, are folks, how are folks feeling about where we are in the big ideas discussion and the fact that, do we need to schedule another meeting in the near term? And what does near term mean? I'd kind of like to get some feedback from the committee on some perspectives on that. We're clearly not going to finish this at 9 o'clock. So are folks up for another near-term meeting to complete this? What does near-term mean for folks and including staff, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, this is Larry. Jessica, timing on some of the other things that are happening in response to Phil. I mean, I'm fine going on tonight, depending on how long it goes. But do you think because of how much information has been downloaded the last couple of weeks, that one more meeting would be appropriate? Again, I'll leave it to everybody, Phil. I'm not passionate one way or the other.
Sure. Well, I would propose that we take a week break and plan for a meeting in 2 weeks out on 2 Tuesdays to wrap this up and actually have some time to talk through this all. Spend 45 minutes or so finishing up the last big idea and whatever, and then spend some time as a committee talking about our own feedbacks, and that be the last of this series of meetings. That's what I would propose. So I can put that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Phil, just for like, it might be helpful to share with you guys as you're talking about this where we're going in our staff work. And I think that what we were going to cover after after Ben's presentation was related to sort of the implementation, specifically related to what we started to talk about last week about an overlay zone and an entity that could kind of help be a champion for this area. Our team is actually going to be kind of drilling down into more detail on these big ideas in the coming weeks, and we hope to brief our planning board at the end of July. One thing that I might suggest is related to covering this barriers and implementation. I feel like we'll have more information to share with you as we kind of do more of that detailed work in the coming weeks. So one suggestion could be for the committee to convene and kind of debrief on what we've talked about so far. And then we could kind of come back to you later in July with kind of more detail on this last big idea. That might be something for the committee to consider.
Yeah, well, so I guess, Jessica, that's reasonable. I obviously can't and don't want to assume anything on behalf of the committee, but what I would suggest is, again, perhaps we can go through the high level information you have and any new information you have on the implementation, as and do the debrief in the next meeting, and then discuss as a committee whether we want to come back and get back together when you have more detail on that latter piece. Does that sound like a reasonable thing to do? I mean, you've taken the effort of preparing the slides. How long do you think the last bunch of slides would be to go through? Is it a 20 minutes, half hour, longer? Not even worth doing because you're still going to drill down, so you don't even want to, you really are opposed to it at this point?
I mean, I think that based on the discussion we had last week, we are at, so as we talked about, this is a very iterative process, and we're kind of at the this is an idea, and now we need to kind of provide more meat on the bones of that idea. And so I think that our hope in the coming weeks is that we start to put more meat on the bones of all of these ideas. So I'm trying to think through, how to kind of keep you all informed as we're adding that additional detail and context. And I think personally, I don't know that I could staff a meeting the last week in July or last week in June. So I think that's just a personal, I don't conflict that I have, but I think that I am sort of here to just kind of give suggestions of where we are and how it might fit into the context of the work that you all are doing. So if you feel like it would be beneficial for us to come back and go through the big ideas, related to economic competitiveness and implementation, I would say that that's probably like 20 minutes.
The two, that's not the two slides that Ben was talking about. That's the
No, so that's all the slides we have left.
that's all the slides.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. So there's two slides I see for economic competitiveness and big ideas, and then there's barriers to implementation, which are the big, so we're definitely not going to cover barriers to implementation tonight. So why don't we do this? Unless anybody objects, I would propose that we'll just caucus, on either, a meeting either next Tuesday or the following Tuesday, see who's up for what to kind of coalesce the any feedback we have on and review, dig deeper into the presentations we've already seen, and we can also in that same email discuss whether we want to go through the remaining remaining slides as part of that, and we understand, Jessica, if you're not available, hopefully well, obviously the staff should chime in on availabilities and as well as in that email thread. Is that reasonable? So we don't have to stay on this call and debate it right now. We can use email, we can use digital means for that. So any objections? Okay, so folks, do we want to let Ben finish up his couple of slides, including the economic competitiveness, big ideas, couple of slides?
Sure.
Okay.
Fine with me.
I could go real fast. Jessica, did you take the slides down, or did I just somehow get rid of them on my you're still sharing them? Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Sorry, bear with me for a minute. That is weird. I don't know how I stopped sharing them. All right, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so this really quickly, the Life Science Center, I mean, the point of this, I think, is something you guys have picked up throughout the last two of these meetings, which is that, yes, we wanted to stay a thriving economic hub. It's really important to the county that it does that. But I think the other thing that hopefully can happen with this plan is that it also becomes a place to live, work, and play, and it's not just an economic center but it's like a full scale like town center and community that all these other things can happen in. So it's about how to add those elements and still and actually even outpace where it has been as like a life science economic driver for the county. So that's the point there. So we can move on to the last slide. And so specifically when we're talking, this is really just like talking about the life science industry itself. Okay, rapid permitting. I don't think we need to I think everybody knows there's always room for improvement with permitting, and we're always thinking about that, and we'll get into details on that later. Small and medium scale lab space. That is one of the things, this is what our study will, the study that we're doing will look into, but we've heard definitely anecdotally, and even to some extent with data can see that there's a lack. It's not just us. Most places, it's very hard to get small and medium scale lab space built because it's risky and because these are startups, early stage companies. You don't know if it's ever. Most of them actually, their technology doesn't work. So this is something that where the next thing says, and as like actually what Mitch was saying and in the comments, like, is there a public role in this? I think we're still exploring this. Like, should we maybe not, we're not going to do things like, state incentives, but are there, can we help? But we have some incubators. They're full. People are not leaving because they have nowhere to go. And is this something that should we have another incubator? Should we try to figure out ways to do what incubators do without maybe not having an actual incubator, but provide those services in some way, in a way to just get have more small and medium scale lab spaces, take on some of this risk, and try to get to grow our industry from the ground up. Because it's really going to be more about that at this point. I mean, we're not really even thinking all that much. We're not going to. It's not about landing the giant, the giant company. We need to evolve it, and with technology that's started and grown here. We'll be talking to to the universities, workforce development about pipelines, educational pipelines. We're a little limited there because we don't have the universities that the other places do. But what we can do is things like what Philadelphia and North Carolina are kind of moving towards, which is the kind of, let's say, mid-skill, the kind of things that don't require a master's or PhD degree, but that are still important, that are still well-paying, that are still very that are needed for a lot of regular lab functions and manufacturing functions. We are kind of looking. We can think about the inventory. We still need to talk about that. We're doing a lot of our own data analysis about specifically about drilling down into what's available in our kind of profile of life sciences space, and then again the sites, the publicly developed life science shared research facilities like lab space and equipment storage. And I don't know if did we have Jessica? Are we going to talk about the? I don't see it on this slide. For some reason in my head it was like the kind of urban district partnership that we may want to explore for this. For some reason I was thinking that was on this slide, but that's for the next, that's for implementation. Okay, so I'll leave that for the next meeting. So so that's really it.
Great. So we're going to set aside barriers for implementation for a future meeting. Does anyone have any questions for Ben on these things right now? Yeah, this I mean, generally, this seems like I would say rather than big ideas, this seems more along the line of a list of economic development best practices, which is great to have, of course, but I think it's the question here is there really a big idea in here other than implement economic development best practices, which is certainly a good idea all by itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the big idea actually is the thing that you probably will, the implementation part of it, which is exploring this idea of kind of an authority or an urban district partnership, because I think for all of these things, I mean, we have MCEDC and they do a good job, but they're tiny, compared to a lot of these places. And as we were talking, we don't fund a lot. We don't have the capacity really across the county to implement a lot of these things. So I think that again, like I think the big idea would be to create some sort of entity that could really focus on this kind of implementation. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. This is some of this is kind of pretty standard. Let's grow our economy type of things. So
right.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why the state isn't included in this? As explicit mention here, since they have a wealth of resources at their disposal. How effectively they use it is a question debatable, but
yeah, that's a good I mean that was probably going to be it's in the recommendation stage, that's always a consideration. I mean, we'll talk to MCEDC about how they want to approach the state, because they do, interact with the state about this kind of, where to coordinate. I mean, the state in a lot of cases tends to be a lot more focused on Baltimore in these days, but whether we want to put something, and I'm typically torn about these types of things, like, do we want to have an explicit recommendation where we say, lobby the state about, about more resources for life sciences in Montgomery County? Is that, we can have that conversation. I think that's definitely something we talk about. Is that something appropriate for a master plan? We wouldn't, planning wouldn't necessarily be the ones doing that. So is it like something that we would then put in the plan for like for one of our partners like MCEDC or the executive's office to do? So and I think that they are doing some of that, I'm sure, but that's where that kind of thing gets. It's just when you're talking about mainly a land use master plan, those kind of things get a little fuzzy. And again, I'm not saying it's not worth it. I'm just saying like I'm happy to discuss with people more, and I'm kind of ambivalent about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Can I add one just comment to that? I would agree for a general master plan, like that wouldn't be appropriate, but this master plan is so focused on a specific industry and figuring out how you're going to make that industry. I mean, when you're talking about lab space and biolife science, like I think it is appropriate. Then you're kind of putting a lot of eggs in one basket with a specific industry, and there has to be some economic development tied to that, as opposed to a more general master plan where you're just speaking of a mix of residential, commercial, and retail, and you're not focusing on like a specific industry.
Okay. Point taken. Yeah.
Mitch, to your point as well, one thing I personally have always been a little bit ambivalent about in the 2010 master plan, and Mitch points to it now in this master plan, is that it is extraordinarily focused on one industry rather than any diversification of economic base, which may well be the right thing to do for this plan and this region. But I think it needs to be clear, it needs to be noted at a minimum that that is an explicit decision that's being taken rather than a happenstance because of the way we happen to be looking at things right now. Right. So just an observation there.
Yeah, I mean, if this was an economic development strategy for the county, it would be an incredibly kind of like constrained and short-sighted because it's all about one industry. But it just so happens that this is, as a master plan, this is the region that just through partly planning, but also just partly other circumstances, it's really the like the hub of all of our life science activities. So I think in that sense, it does, I think it's appropriate. And I guess, one of the other things, the way I tend to look at economic development, it's mainly about your exporting industries. And this is kind of like the main one that Montgomery County has. It's super important. And when I look at, so like certainly increasing retail and making this more of like a livable place is in part economic development. I mean, you're going to add people living there. There's the consumption part of this also. To me, that's a bit downstream from it, but that definitely still is part of that. It's going to be part of the plan. Also, we kind of didn't get. I think maybe because it's not a big idea in the sense that it'd be great to have some more restaurants that you can walk to, so maybe that's why that didn't get emphasized enough. But I do think all of that goes with this, with growing the life sciences industry too.
Any other questions or comments for Ben? Okay, well, as usual, staff, thank you for excellent presentations, excellent materials, lots to think about and talk about. So again, I've proposed that we'll caucus via email. I'll about a next meeting date where we'll discuss feedbacks on some of these things and also discuss how we want to finish out the discussion with the planning staff, and obviously, Jessica and company, you'll provide feedback into the meetings and so on as well, right? So, any any questions, concerns in closing, before, any issues with taking this offline to coordinate by email for our next meeting? Okay. Is there any disagreement that we should bother to have a discussional meeting where we consolidate what we've heard and learned in our feedback in the near term? Any objections to that? Okay, then that's what we will do, and we'll pick a time, and we'll also, Jessica, as part of the, exchanges over the next few days, we'll discuss how you guys think best, how the staff thinks best to deal with the additional materials that you're gathering, and you can provide input into how you think we should schedule. Again, typically we wouldn't do a July or August meetings, but you're trying to, you said that you're trying to present a more detailed version of the big ideas to the planning board at the end of July. Is that right? So
that's what we're currently targeting, is to present, to drill down a bit more with the board, July 27th.
Okay.
And we'll see how we're able to advance the work over that period of time. We have a lot of work to do. So but that's kind of our current target.
Right. So if this committee wants to provide any feedback into that, consensus feedback into that, then we have the month. So okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess unless any objections, we'll move to close out the meeting. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.